Welcome to the preview of Self-Value, The Story of Me by Brandon Williams, narrated by Donald Gasson Jr. The book in its entirety is available on audible.com in this format and on amazon.com in both print and ebook formats. Without any further ado, enjoy. Chapter 1: Addiction and Abuse. Suddenly, I heard yelling from my mother's bedroom. I anxiously threw the bottle of wine down and ran back into the living room so they would not find me in the kitchen drinking it. Seconds later, I heard a loud thump and then another. I slipped into my bed, my mouth a bit numb and my stomach welling with the warmth of the alcohol. Their bedroom walls vibrated and I curled up next to my brother, holding my breath. Then I heard the sound of wall fixtures crashing onto the floor. Gregory was shouting viciously at my mother. "Mother!" I leapt out of bed and ran to the bedroom. The door was shut, so I cautiously turned the knob and cracked it open. I could see my mother lying on the floor, lifeless but still gasping for air. Gregory had straddled himself across my mother's lap and was clenching her neck with both hands, choking her as she struggled to gasp for air. Gregory's shirt was drenched in sweat as he seemed to be exhausted from the prolonged beating he had inflicted upon my mother. The sweat on his hands caused his grip around mother's neck to loosen. Chapter 2: Searching for Peace. I went to bed and awoke early the next morning for school. I boarded the school bus and the driver followed his bus route into the town of Glendale. Soon, the bus was driving into Glendale's high crime and drug infested area everyone called the Trap to pick up a few kids on his route. When we drove through the Trap, all of the kids were looking out the school bus window at the multitude of people littering the street at 7 in the morning. Among those people was my mother. I was saddened to see her out there in such a violent environment. I wanted to shout or wave to get her attention, but I was too afraid of being bullied by my peers. I sat in silence as we drove away. Every morning, as the bus passed through the Trap, I would fix my eyes on the place where I had seen her standing the day before. Every morning, my eyes would drink in the sight of her. Every morning, as the bus drove away, I would watch her steadily until I could no longer see her. Jackie Jean Williams is the single most important person in the world to me. This woman and I have endured and experienced. Chapter 3: Angels of the Night. There was an incident on the block with two of my older cousins, a crack addict, and I almost got shot. We were riding around in my cousin's car when he stopped at a crack dealer user's house. One of my cousins got out and went to the door because he needed to collect some money that was owed to them. Unfortunately, he said or did something to the guy that he did not like because suddenly my cousin was racing back to the car. When he hopped inside, he asked his brother if he had his gun, to which he replied, no. We looked over to see the dealer storming out of his house, wielding a 12-gauge shotgun. I never got a good look at the guy with the shotgun, and I was not aware of their business with him. My cousin sped off, while my other cousin pulled the crack addict over him like a human shield. I was in the worst spot because that lunatic was approaching our vehicle from the rear. I slumped over in the back seat to avoid being shot. Luckily for us, this guy must have not had any intentions of killing us after all. He had never squeezed off a single round. For some strange reason, and to my knowledge, no one retaliated against that guy. Both of my cousins were notorious criminals. In fact, they seemed to love living a thug's life. I was more upset with them than the nut. Chapter 4: Survival Instincts. I was broken up on the inside. I was ready to give up. I held the gun in my hand tightly and continued to try to calm myself. The script and soundtrack of my life played in my head. The script was entitled Failure, and the soundtrack caption read, A Lifetime of Crying and Disappointment. I put the gun to my head and the music stopped. My heart pumped harder and harder as my adrenaline rushed. I placed my finger over the trigger and stared at myself in the mirror. How worthless I am, I thought for a moment before deciding to kill myself. I was fed up with life and no longer willing to suffer the brutality it subjected me to. I started to sweat nervously. As I cocked the hammer of the gun, I was ready to die. Though just as I was about to pull the trigger, I thought about my mother. I had thought about everything in my life except for her, and had decided there was nothing for me. But when I thought about her and all the torture and suffering we had gone through together, more tears rolled down my face. My eyes were red and mucus was running from my nose. Chapter 5: Lifetime Chances. She walked inside the house and slowly made her way towards the bathroom. I followed her inside and watched as she stood in the doorway, looking in the mirror. I stood with her as she strained to examine the bruises on her face out of the eye she was able to reopen. We studied her blackened, swollen eyes and bloody nose. My mother had been brutally trampled. Her whole face suffered bruises and deep scratch marks and lacerations. We stood there for a while, motionless, without speaking. It was the silence of that moment that spoke to us. It told us it would heal us from the constant battery and beatings of life. My mother began to cry, and I wept right along with her. I tried to be strong and hold it inside, but I could not stop the tears from flowing. She would stop crying for a time and seconds later burst into tears again. It was a sort of therapy that released all of our anger, rage, hurt, and pain. To the women reading this story, in all honesty, have you ever worn my mother's shades? Chapter 6. Coping with Pain. Before he left her room, she told him about the argument she and I had earlier. Daniel capitalized on the moment to change Medea's heart about giving him the money. He walked in front of me while I was sitting down and stood there for a moment with a blank stare. Without warning, he struck me in my face with his fist. The blow hurt my sense of being and value as a person more than it did physically. I looked up at him from my chair, and a single tear of surprise rolled down the right side of my face. I considered trying to fight him back to defend myself, but I couldn't believe my cousin had done this. I openly admired and embraced him, second only to my mother. He remained standing over me in the same position he was before he struck me. I can only assume he was about to strike me a second time before Andrew rushed over and grabbed him. Daniel, stop, Andrew screamed. Don't hit Brad like that. He's a child. Daniel walked away. Much like my abused mother, I wiped away the single tear that formed a stream from my swollen face. I was abused as a child. Chapter 7. Marine Corps. The basic training camp looked similar to a university campus with large patches of sand scattered around. It took a while for me to get used to the humidity. Who in the hell asked you to put those blindfolds on? A master sergeant asked with the instructors who ordered us to wear them standing in the background. Surely not one of these fine gentlemen, did they? You over there, who told you to put on the blindfold? The recruit answered that he didn't know. You are fucking lying. Who let this goddamn liar into the United States Marine Corps? Faces in the dirt, was one of the first orders I could remember receiving at Camp Pendleton. We all hopped off the bus and dropped to the ground unilaterally, faces planted in the dirt, and waited for our next command. A drill instructor yelled, "On your feet!" and we jumped to our feet. Then we were escorted to a medical clinic to get a series of shots. I have no earthly idea what types of shots we got. All I remember is being sore wherever the needle stuck me. I sat on my left butt cheek for several hours while waiting to get the remainder of my shots because the right one was too sore. In the clinic, I saw hundreds. Chapter 8. Release from duty. I was accompanied with several other Marines who were standing on a bank overlooking the beautiful waters of the Pacific Ocean. The drill instructors escorting us pointed to a group of kids about 50 yards away. They were also admiring the ocean. The drill instructors told us that all of those children had cancer and had a life expectancy of 3 to 4 years. They encouraged us to go over and speak with the kids if we liked, but added that this wasn't mandatory of us. Most, if not all of us, stood there, motionless, and didn't attempt to make contact with the kids. I stood there confused because I assumed they were some lucky kids who were enjoying a nice vacation in sunny California. I waited a few seconds to follow the lead of the first guy who volunteered to speak to the kids until I realized no one did. So I became that guy. Soon after I departed, several others followed me. The kids were so amazed with us. We hardly got a chance to say anything to them since we were bombarded with question after question. Mister, what's that? One of the kids asked while pointing. Chapter 9. Academics. Mother and I shared a lot of big moments while she was incarcerated, and my going off to college was one of those moments. At the time, I couldn't see the grandness or the brevity of my plight. I only felt that since I had realized who I was in Christ, I knew living a wild and crazy life wasn't for me anymore. When I was a child, I thought like a child and acted like a child, but when I became a man, I put childish things away, the Apostle Paul. Apart from my short stint in the USMC, being in Midland was the first time I had control over my life and exercised the power to choose where I lived. Other than that, I would find shelter and refuge with whoever felt compassion for me and understood my hardships. I would sleep in crack houses or hang in the streets all night. I always refused to go to sleep whenever I stayed overnight on a street corner because my pride wouldn't allow me to do so. There may have been one isolated occasion or two when I did the contrary, but that seldom occurred. At CSU, I didn't have to live with anyone. Chapter 10. Restitution. One officer shoved his shoulder into the door, but he was humiliatingly unsuccessful. I motioned for the officer to step aside and I kicked the door in. It swung open forcefully, striking a wall, and bounced back. I rested my hand against it as we rushed in with guns drawn, ordering the man to the ground. He refused. Down, down, down on the ground now. I, along with another officer, grabbed him and threw him against the wall, placing him under arrest. I escorted him out of the home to place him in my cruiser. The other officers stayed back to interview the victim. I'm not sure how, but while I was walking the suspect to my cruiser, the victim came from nowhere and started beating him in the back of his head with her fist. I stepped in front of her, attempting to stop her from attacking a defenseless man. Then something came over me. I was arrested by the pain and long suffering of the millions of battered women. I was paralyzed and gripped with sorrow, somehow unable to move. My legs became numb, and that woman walked around me and handed down the worst ass whooping I had ever witnessed. I clenched my bottom lip with my teeth as I looked on. Chapter 11. Racism and Law Enforcement. Shut up, that's enough. Now I've had enough of your smart mouth, the lieutenant commented. At that point, I declined to speak or try to shield myself. It was reasonably clear they were paying me back for reporting my partner, their good friend. The sergeant wasn't even present when the incident between the corporal and I took place. The trio was retaliating. They were bent on getting even, and so they did. They conferred amongst themselves and gave matching accounts of everything that took place, from alleged insubordination, having a smart mouth, and making a mistake on a crash report. This was done in desperate efforts to slander my name. I was perplexed when I heard the rumor that the sergeant who wasn't even present during the incident had written a statement against me. I find it astonishing how far hatred of one's color, creed, or race can drive someone. The corporal told me I didn't list all of the damage to one of the vehicles involved in the 3-car crash. Once he finally calmed down, I corrected the mistake. When I wrote my statement regarding my partner for not clearing a room and lying about it, my statement was made available to anyone who wished to see it, thus giving my partner an opportunity to know what he was being accused of. Then he could give his own account of what happened. Chapter 12. Sinful Enticement. At a red light 3 blocks away from the club, we saw Candy. She was in a black SUV with several other strippers. We looked on, their music blared. They talked loudly and tippled down their mixed drinks. I could smell the perfume from my friend's car. The light turned green and they drove away. My friend and I had a short dialogue about pursuing them. We concluded that we would follow them, like an ox going to the slaughter, like a stag caught in a trap, awaiting the arrow that would pierce its heart. Proverbs 7:22. We drove into a hotel parking lot behind them. Soon after, another carload of strippers pulled in. They got out of their vehicle and congregated together. Then someone turned on the radio and began to dance provocatively. They were hanging out in the parking lot. I exited the vehicle and leaned against it, scanning the crowd for Candy. I attempted to approach her as soon as I saw her, but I was intercepted by her manager. Okay, he was her pimp. After he introduced us, and before he left to attend to the other ladies, he gave us a room number. Candy and I walked into the dark room together. She didn't talk much, nor did I. Chapter 13. Calm in the Storm. I looked intently inside the vehicle. Seated inside was a little old white lady. She was well dressed and smelled of expensive perfume. Her white pearl earrings matched the pearl necklace that adorned her neck. She motioned me closer. Son, you need to get out of this rainstorm, she said with the same temperament as a mother expressing concern for her children. Her nice words were well received. I smiled and paused shortly before responding. I would love to, ma'am, but there's been a multiple car crash. One of the vehicles is disabled just north of this intersection. Right there, I pointed. I'll be here directing traffic until it's towed out of the roadway. That's unbelievable. Officer, here, I have something for you. She said this while opening her door. Based on the scene Forrest described, one can only imagine that at least 2 or 3 feet of water, at a bare minimum, poured into the old lady's car when she opened her door. Ma'am, that's okay. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, but we can't accept gifts. I attempted to close her door shut to keep her from getting soaked or stung to death by those god-awful stinging raindrops. Chapter 14. Officer Friendly. I told her about a friend who said his girlfriend gave him a head job for his birthday while he was dropping them to dinner. She asked what I thought about my friend's birthday gift. I replied, "Best ever." She started smiling and jokingly said that she wanted to share that experience with me, and we did. I told her that same day that I'd like to return the favor. She said it would be too complicated and much harder for me to perform oral sex on her while she was driving, but it really wasn't. We were driving back to Garland from visiting some of her family in Atlanta. I put my hands between her legs and started caressing her. One thing led to another, and the next thing I knew, we were weaving and swerving down the freeway. We frequently crossed the yellow line and drove onto the ridges of the shoulder of the road that makes the loud roaring noise when you drive on them. "There's someone driving next to us, babe. I think they can see us." "Babe, they can see us," she said each time I kissed, licked, and sucked her panic button. She eventually pulled over to the shoulder of the road to recoup. She looked over at me and with a huge smirk on her face and told me I was crazy. Chapter 15. Reality of Life's Lessons. I radioed a second time for the dispatcher to send another unit for assistance. I pursued them to the ambulance. As I approached, they opened the rear door of the ambulance. The paramedics attempted to stop the irate parents from entering the ambulance while they were rendering medical treatment to their teen daughter. I asked the medics to step aside and ordered the couple to stop, but they persisted. I attempted to close the rear door and was knocked against the ambulance when they snatched the door from me. I grabbed the father by his arm and escorted him away from his wife, placing him under arrest. Going back, I wrestled the mother out of the ambulance and attempted to calm her. However, once she realized that I arrested her husband, she became increasingly irate. I continually called for additional officers for assistance. The group of teens started pacing frantically around me. They wanted to intervene. The drunken mother yelled and screamed at her daughter, and I tried to get her out of the ambulance. I grabbed her arm to handcuff her, and then her robe flung open, distastefully baring all. The medics looked as startled as I did. I released her arm, told her to close her robe, and put on some clothes. Chapter 16. Self-value. She also started prostituting to earn money to buy food and school supplies. This reflects the rationale of my younger self when I was dealing crack. Soon after, Janet started selling her body to men and hiring herself out to women. She never intended on sleeping with women, but noted that more women than men approached her for sex. Janice reluctantly accepted female clients so she would not lose the potential earnings. By this time, she had already conceived a child, adding more responsibility. She loved to write about her past, as well as her daily life. That was a sort of escape for her. It made her happy. "Mr. Williams, would you like to read some of my writings?" I sat down and read with her almost every day. She was my inspiration to write. I struggled with writing about my past because it hurt. It was depressing for me. So how did she find peace in writing? Little Janice told me to keep writing my story and not give up. She asked me for a copy of my book once I completed it. At the time, I had less than a 20,000-word manuscript. Another dilemma was that I couldn't type. Chapter 17. Poems. I am forever in search of promise. The promise inside of me. I am not the same. I've changed. Unsure. I am unsure where life will lead me when I am released from this jail. I am unsure of the people that claim to love me. I am unsure of the man I love and his feeling for me. I am unsure where I will sleep every night. But Lord, one thing that I am sure of is you, Jesus, and your love for me and all mankind. I am sure that if I stay with you, I will be filled with love and peace. Jackie Williams.